Good evening again and welcome back to Point Blank here at KTN News, shooting from the Nairobi Serena. We always say that Point Blank is not a cup of tea for everyone, but if you want to get behind the headlines, welcome. Mheshimiwa, there has been silence by President Kenyatta until the funeral of your brother, Peter Kenneth's mother, Rahab, that he spoke first about the Division of Revenue Allocation Bill. Your boss, the Prime Minister, has remained tight-lipped. And Kenyans normally see you and Orengo as a team. So it's quite interesting when you see Orengo leading senators in court, the same Supreme Court where you and him were a team, and you lead in parliament, and Odinga is silent. So the rank and file of this country would like to know, hii maneno ya revenue share, hii bill, what is going on, Mheshimiwa? The law and the politics.
First, let's say that this question of division of revenue bill has assumed non-political lines. Instead, it has taken issue at the level of the competition between the two houses of parliament. The senators have unanimously, irrespective of party, taken one line together with the governors and the Commission on Revenue Allocation. The National Assembly, across political parties, has taken one line together with Treasury and the President. Two, I can tell you that I'm aware there's been a lot of consultation. And the truth of the matter is that some of those consultations ended up resulting in enhancement of the allocation. The original allocation by the National Assembly was much less. After those consultations, which even included governors, including the head of the Governors' Council, it resulted in a negotiation of 316 billion, which is now what came to the National Assembly. But when then the Commission on Revenue Allocation had recommended 335 billion, and then I think the governors saw that the senators are sticking with that, I think they forgot about even the enhancement and the negotiation, and they're there. Let's put it this way. There are a number of articles in the Constitution that are important. And I will discuss this reservedly because it's also actively in court. And the articles to look at is Article 95 of the Constitution, Article 96 of the Constitution. That defines the role of the Senate and the National Assembly. Then there's Article 114 of the Constitution that talks of a money bill. And money bills are an exclusive domain of the National Assembly. Money bills being bills that involve expenditure. There, the National Assembly is given almost exclusive jurisdiction. Then you come to Article 216, that gives the powers of the Commission on Revenue Allocation, where it recommends, it does not determine. And ultimately, Article 217 on the Division of Revenue Bill. At the foot of this problem are two issues. One, the Senate believes, rightfully, that since under Article 94 and 95, its primary mandate is to protect the counties. It therefore should have a fundamental say in how much goes to the counties. And to the extent that the CRA had recommended 335 billion, it's sticking to that higher figure because the more the money the counties get, the more protected they are. Secondly, it is relying on a Supreme Court advisory that said that a division of revenue bill is not a money bill, it is an ordinary bill. Because it's an ordinary bill, it can be initiated even in the Senate. That's their position. The governors, since they want more money, they're sticking with that. So on this other side, yes, the National Assembly takes the view that although the Supreme Court said the revenue bill is not a money bill, in truth it is a money bill. And so it is hoping to persuade the Supreme Court to change its mind. Secondly, they take the view that this is a bill like any other. And if it's a bill like any other, then the Senate cannot initiate such a bill. They only participate in it. they cannot initiate it. Thirdly, they take the view that no matter how much money you want to go to the counties, it must be tempered by the reality. Do we have the money? And they take the advice of Treasury and of the President that we do not have 335 billion to give the counties. That is the real issue. However, that real issue is now muffled in tough wars. It is a question of, is the National Assembly superior or the Senate? That is unfortunate.
But Mheshimiwa, I don't want to interrupt you. Obviously, Jubilee, even ODM, you occupy both houses. I mean, you have Orengo here, Otiende on the other side. The same for Jubilee. You go to the Jubilee people on the other side, Mukomen and Duale on this side. It doesn't make sense to the owner. Well, point blank, honestly.
Let me tell you this. First, that's one of the mysteries. Jubilee controls both the Senate and the National Assembly. And whenever they've wanted any law or bill passed, they have usually made sure it does. It's a bit curious why Jubilee cannot agree and take leadership on this division of revenue bill. That's number one. Number two, I sometimes get the feeling that some of the internal schisms within Jubilee have found a way of coming into both houses of parliament and has tended to affect how even my colleagues in both houses look at some of these matters. I suppose that if you didn't have schisms within Jubilee and you are elected within Jubilee and the President of the Republic has pronounced himself on a matter and is your leader, there should be no doubt that you will toe that line. The fact that some people can think that they cannot toe, for me, speak to the schisms within Jubilee. But more importantly, I think the distinctions between the Senate and the National Assembly are exaggerated. I will tell you there are many of us in the National Assembly who don't feel as strongly. And I agree, and that brings me to the court case. You are aware that these matters are actually in court. Last week, the Chief Justice decided that they were not going to pronounce themselves on it. They allowed both houses time to negotiate. He allowed a mediation. I saw that the Law Society had volunteered to mediate. The two leaders in Parliament can actually cause a mediation. And if need be, and I even spoke to my predecessor in the Ombudsman office, the Ombudsman can actually come in and mediate. The issue of where should we be between 316 and 335 billion is not a matter that should go to the Supreme Court. It's not a matter that should occupy us and cause bad blood. It's a matter that can be resolved. What is the practical amount of money that should go to the counties, and what is the practical amount of money that is available?
Mheshimiwa, I raise this because on top of the President speaking that he's not going to go a penny above the 316 billion, there's also a directive now that has been ordered by the head of the public service, Joseph Kenywa, to all the parastatals, saying that no more money other than recurrent expenditure will be incurred by parastatals, so that there is almost a freeze on government money. How does this, mirrored into what's going on in Parliament, pertain to the next few weeks or days of negotiations? I'm asking because Kenyans are going to feel the blunt when the counties don't have money to pay wages, cannot run their normal businesses.
Let's put it point blank. One, I think that the Senate, the governors, and the CRA should be reasonable in terms of understanding the amount of money that can be allocated. It is not an academic exercise of saying 350 billion, 400 billion, 200 billion. They must temper it with the reality. And the advice of Treasury and the KRA is very important, and they must take it. Two, they must understand that what CRA gives is a recommendation. It is not mandatory that their recommendation be adopted. The recommendation must be discussed and agreed on. However, three, it is not up to the President either to give that money. It is Parliament that determines the amount. And now that the two houses of Parliament have not agreed and it's in court, only two things would happen. Either they take the advice, we take the advice as a House of Parliament of the Chief Justice and negotiate and agree, even if it's 316 billion, and then it is passed. Or the Supreme Court will then have the opportunity to pronounce itself on it. And if it does, then everyone must respect that outcome.
The Senate will respect.
The National Assembly, the national government, they must.
Will the National Assembly respect the decision of the court?
It is obligatory that as parties before the court, if the court pronounces itself on a matter, then you must respect it. It was my preference that we do not allow the court to pronounce itself on it. It is a matter that we should resolve internally.
Let me shift the gear to you and your boss and the president. Why would Odinga and Kenyatta not call governors away from the cameras and say, let's have a Kamukunjis? Let's talk about these things. And why can't they, because they control the majority of governors, through what we are saying is not just Jubilee, but Jubilee plus the NASA family, including those who may not be ODM, people like Kalonzo, and so forth. Why can't there be an initiative of political leadership to kind of try to do what Maraga is saying? Maraga is saying that not only is this an issue for Senate and Parliament, but it might also be a political issue of settlement. Has there been discussions behind the scenes? Will there be discussions so that Kenyans can get services?
There are three things outstanding on that issue, Tony. First, as far as I know, there have been consultations, and there were consultations even with the governors. But you know, at the end of the day, it's not so much the governors who have a say. They might join, they might be with the senators, but it is not them to determine. It is Parliament. So the fundamental issue is with the National Assembly and the Senate. Two, I think that sometimes this matter assumes the political lines within Jubilee. You must remember that even as we say Jubilee controls both houses, it is now evident that in Jubilee, there are those who pledge direct loyalty to the president and those who pledge it to the deputy president. From a casual glance, it appears to me that the Jubilee that leads Senate appears to go with the deputy president, and it appears vice versa in the National Assembly. And although it's been...
No, this is very important, and this is point blank, because it is true that the Speaker of the Senate, Lusaka, is among the key campaigners for the deputy president.
And the leader of majority. And the deputy leader of the chief whip, and most of the formations within the Senate.
Well, that is not in Maraga's court, so
yes,
we can discuss that.
That is not in Maraga's court.
So that is true. And on this other hand, Muturi is seen to be a royalist.
Historically, has always been close to the president, and even the leader of majority within the National Assembly, who has been on the other faction, appears to be drifting from a number of reasons to this other one. So it is quite possible that those factional issues is preventing sanity prevailing at the level of leadership of the Senate and the National Assembly. But lastly...
But if that is true, and as I'll let you say lastly, but I wanted to ask you, because as we move on to the next subject, you are saying lastly.
Lastly, the mediation should be meaningful. And the mediation, primarily, the person who's most central in the mediation is usually the chairman of the budget committee, in this case, Kimani Ichung'wah, in the National Assembly, and his committee, and those who are appointed. The last mediation flopped. And recently, when the National Assembly approved the 316 billion, there was also a mediation committee that was appointed, which should be working. But the truth is, if the mediation committees were well-meaning, we would resolve these matters without going back to Maraga's court. I said in Parliament last week that if we as Parliament take our own issues to the judiciary to resolve, then by that dint, we reduce our own autonomy, and we cannot complain when then the judiciary takes over some of our roles.
So I want to give you a point-blank challenge. If it is true that the Senate may be drifting towards the deputy president, why can't ODM, why can't those loyal to the president be de-whipped, or in fact whipped to toe the line? Why can't there, if it's political, why can't that gear of politics be put? Because the country, the president was very clear, in fact, very candid when he spoke on the matter. Do you expect, as we move on to other issues, do you expect that there will now be some politicking to deal with this matter? It cannot remain a standoff. Or will it be left to Maraga's court to deal with this political impasse?
Let me explain, then I'll answer your last question. I had said that those schisms appear to be in play. But those schisms are now undermined by another point, which is that in the course of discussing this division of revenue, people have made utterances in the National Assembly demeaning to senators. And so a lot of the senators are no longer talking about the amount. They are talking about the dignity and the position of the Senate. And therefore, this issue is conflated in terms of the struggle between the two houses. And so much of it is no longer even, is it 335 billion that we should give? But it is, we are the superior house, and we are the superior house. So that is also the second problem, which now takes it further away even from those schisms. Do I see as resolving this matter or going back to Maraga? Either of two things, because this has to be done in the next 2 or 3 days. Either, and I've said this, we meaningfully get a mediator. The idea of the mediation contemplated within the Constitution is not working, because those appointed from the National Assembly are sticking with the National Assembly. Those appointed from the Senate are sticking with the Senate. We now need a mediator who is not entrapped by those positions.
I think you've answered the question,
Yes.
point blank. I think Kenyatta and Odinga will flee from this, and they will let Maraga deal with it. Because if everything else fails, you will leave it to the
It will have to be the Supreme Court.
But I think politicians will all flee, including the deputy president. Now, brings me to that subject. It's not point blank unless you discuss the deputy president. Let me ask you, there's been all this issue of political formations, schisms that you are saying. In earthquake, they're called tremors.
Yes.
So there are fault lines that are consequent upon a tremor. I think they measure it, I forget the scale, depending on the quake. Politically, after we go to next year and do the referendum, political formations are brewing. Where does the political hat that you wear, Mheshimiwa, now, let's talk as Rarieda MP and remove the hat of council. Politically, you and ODM, are you clearly right now creating a path post-referendum?
Well, about a year ago, I had said in another show that I foresee heavy political tectonic movements, and that's what we are having right now. From what I can see, the formations we had at the last elections are completely disconfiguring and reconfiguring. And my anticipation is that by the time we have elections in 2022, we will essentially have new political outfits. It is clear that as ODM, we have maintained our position. We have chosen to cooperate with government right now, especially government insofar as it's led by the president. It is true that within the original NASA, there are formations that may not be completely there yet. It is obvious that within Jubilee, there are serious fractions. And I think anyone and everyone knows that there are very serious tensions within Jubilee. If I were the president, I would do the only thing that he can do. He cannot resign the way some people have suggested. Because if the president resigns now, automatically the deputy president acts as president. So he will have done nothing. It's not as if he resigns, then deputy must resign. No. And if he resigns, it is even doubtful whether he can vie again. In fact, he would not be able to vie again, and there will be no vacancy. The deputy president will automatically assume. The only thing the president can do now, he cannot resign. He cannot dissolve parliament, as with the previous constitution, but he can dissolve cabinet and reconstitute it. It is time that the president called everyone's bluff, dissolved cabinet, and anybody who's uncomfortable with his leadership then must be on the wayside. Only those who are prepared to go with him for the length of his journey must remain. Secondly, I think that the political formation and cooperation that we now have with that faction of Jubilee, it will crystallize with the BBI and the referendum. And once it does, I see people opposing that initiative within Jubilee. And from that point henceforth, you will essentially have a coalition of the willing who are willing to invest in the future of this country through that BBI and the referendum, and you'll have the coalition of those who are opposed to it. And those coalitions will essentially constitute the movement toward 2022.
I want to ask you, are you going to play an increased role within the party? I know you have a Secretary General in Sifuna. You as Otiende, do you have a bigger role within the party?
I am
ODM?
a loyal member of ODM. I am one of the lawyers who work closely with the Secretariat on various issues, whether it's in court or whether it's outside of court, and I intend to remain actively in that capacity. It is not my intention to get any other role because, there's also restriction in terms of elected members. There are certain roles you might not play, but I intend to remain active within the party.
I ask the question because if you are talking about June next year, when this referendum will have been decided, the politics will kick into another phase, starting 2020, mid-2020. So towards the end of 2020, it will be clearer as you go into 2021 what's beginning to happen.
Absolutely.
And is ODM organized to be able to play a full part at that time in terms of its political options?
We as a party, led by our party leader, have always been clear. The first priority is to secure the future of this country, more than any other. And that's what we are all working on in terms of the BBI and the amendment and the referendum. Moving forward in the context of what will come out, and I can tell you, Tony, that the things that need to be focused on in this country are very fundamental. They are not some of the things that have been. We need to refocus on the system of government that we have. Do we maintain a parliamentary system? Do we go presidential? That's very fundamental. Do we still have a bicameral parliament? Do we need the Senate and do we need the National Assembly, or do we now just need one?
Will devolution be three-tier or two-tier?
Devolution will be three-tier or two-tier or remain as it is? Representation. Shall we maintain this idea of direct election, first past the post, or we go the representative way, which can reduce the numbers
and have party lists,
which can also increase representation? So those are fundamental issues. Now, with those ones, we will have secured the future. Then we can now talk about 2020.
I'll call you back when the report is back, but I can't let you go without allowing you to say a few words about Rarieda.
Yes, it is my privilege to be the member of parliament for Rarieda. As you know, Rarieda has one of the longest shorelines of Lake Victoria, 224 kilometers. We, in the context of the party, have an incorporation, and we are working with government on a number of projects. Only recently you saw Raphael Tuju was deputized by the president to come to Rarieda. We are happy to work with the president to develop Rarieda, to develop this country and the future of all of us.
You're watching Point Blank here at KTN News. Otiende Amolo says Uhuru should reconstitute his cabinet, and he says that Kenyans should look for a referendum in the middle of next year and new political formations. Tells the people of Rarieda he's representing them every day. Asante sana, Mheshimiwa, asante sana.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
You're watching KTN News.
Point Blank by TG was filmed on location at the Nairobi Serena Hotel.